we have two of our guests, Rez and Ignatius. So they are from the Starkware Primitives team. So I know that those two terms might not be super familiar to everybody. So I would leave it to them to introduce themselves first before we kick off. Hey Rez, hey Ignatius. Mind if you do a quick introduction about yourself first before StarkNet and Primitives in general?
I can kick it off. So yeah, my name is Ignatius. So I joined the Immutable team roughly 2 years ago now, and that was roughly around the same time that Immutable X just started. Um, so yeah, more recently, we stood up this new team, as Nigel mentioned. It's a combination of StarkNet/Primitives. And yeah, right now acting as the tech lead and the product owner for this team. And yeah, really excited to be here.
Yeah, so on my end, I'm also a software engineer on the Primitives team. I've been working in and around blockchain for about maybe 3 or 4 years now. So yeah, like have seen so many ups and downs in this space, but now what we're seeing with StarkNet, super exciting, and that's really what our squad is going to be focusing on this next future technology.
Awesome. So let's get to it then. I have a bunch of questions, but let's make it super casual and just to get to know what are you guys working on? Why should people be excited and how can they be involved? That's the main thing for this chat. To kick things off, and feel free to just jump in, right, Ignatius says. And if anybody in the crowd, we have a nice intimate crowd right now. If you have any questions as well, feel free to just drop it in the questions channel or raise your hand. I'd be happy to put you up in the stage as well. Anytime during the call, feel free to just do that. Yeah, so Ignatius Rez, what is this thing? StarkNet and primitives. Sounds like a mouthful to me. Could you do a quick breakdown of what exactly this is and what are the goals of this team?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So I think it's worth talking a bit about like how we got here, right? So I'm sure everyone knows the issues with scaling and cost and user experience on Ethereum, right? There has been a lot of development in the past recent years in terms of scaling and how do we scale layer one, and this is where a lot of the layer two solutions came out. Things like optimism, arbitrum, so the optimistic rollups, and you have things like the ZK rollups, right? Now, fast forward, us as a company, we believe that ZK rollups is the future. Not only us, a lot of people in the community, Vitalik also kind of concurred to that. And so essentially the big question that we're kind of trying to answer as a team is really how are we as a company going to be maximally successful on this multi-Stark rollup future, right? So we want to answer that question. And to date, we've been operating on StarkX, right? So StarkX, to kind of like create a point of differentiation over here between StarkNet and StarkX. So StarkX is essentially an application-specific ZK rollup. And what that means is that there is a very limited primitive set, which means you can really only do things like transferring, trading through limit orders, depositing, withdrawals, and minting, right? So essentially, you can really build a lot of things around it already, right? Most of the games these days, all of the NFT gaming and stuff all that you see on a marketplace, really only need StarkX, right? You get this benefit of having hyperscale, having more control over the infrastructure as well, and over the cost and the governance and so on, right? So I guess the mission for our team now, right, is really just to enable digital world economies by providing novel, easy to use, and really more robust and liquid, scalable ways to discover and trade assets, right? So we essentially went from StarkX to now StarkNet, right? So there's a question now in terms of like, what is robustness? Like, what are we trying to do on StarkNet, right? So this is where we get to like the primitive side, right? What is our strategy to actually execute on StarkNet? And really, we want to focus on providing, again, new and more robust ways to facilitate liquidity and trade for the Web3 gaming economies, right? And how are we going to do this? Is that we're going to build these things called primitives, right? So a primitive is really just an application layer building block, right? So this could essentially, you can think of it as like ranging from, token standards to asset bridges to more complicated DeFi blocks like, NFT AMMs, essentially solving the fractionalization and reconstitution problem, right? And we really want to focus on building primitives that really just build that positive feedback loop to funnel liquidity and value back into our token and protocol, right? So I guess that's a sort of transition from StarkX to StarkNet, and essentially, what are we building on StarkNet?
Got it. Thanks for that, Ignatius. How about you, Rez? Like, what is your interpretation of all this, especially with your background? Like you said you've been doing blockchain for a while now. Where did that come from, and why are you excited to work on this?
Yeah, so I think it's interesting because even in my blockchain history, everyone's kind of had to face the same problem of scalability. Everyone wants to build global scale applications, but every time someone tries to build something of that scale on a blockchain, we hit limitations. And it's really exciting to see with StarkNet and StarkX as well, how we're actually overcoming these fundamental limitations, which have kind of bottlenecked many organizations from reaching planet scale with their blockchain applications. And it's really exciting to actually see it come to life. And working on StarkNet, we're seeing that the technology is finally reaching the stage where, we can enable these applications and games in particular to succeed.
Going back to Ignatius, you mentioned a lot of these things like primitives, token standards, NFTs, AMMs. Why should people, like, for example, why should the people here care? How can they contribute here? What will they be able to do later on if we are able to create these primitives? What's the why here?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I think it's worth talking again briefly about StarkX. The thing is, you can build a lot of these so-called, application layer infrastructure on StarkX, right? You have these base building blocks that I mentioned previously, and most like Web3 games, you can that really focus on the gameplay, move that off chain. They essentially, build that in some, traditional, gaming development framework, and essentially they just move the what they call like the trading side of things, right? Like the trading, the minting, and all that kind of stuff to our platform, right? Now you can then go one step further and say, okay, I want to build all these primitives on StarkX, right? But then there is a consideration of like, okay, there is going to be a restraint in terms of like what level of trustlessness you can provide with these primitives, right? Given that either Immutable X or that company will be building it, right? So it's not that, trustless environment that everyone is used to by building on Ethereum, right? And there are a few other considerations as well in terms of like, interoperability, given that right now StarkX is again an application specific rollup, right? There are no bridges at the moment in terms of like between cross rollups at the moment. So it's kind of like it's sitting there, right? So now when we start building primitives on StarkNet, we essentially have this again, general purpose environment, right? So we can essentially build these primitives with the added benefit of all the things that you're used to in blockchain, right? So added benefits of like, factoring in credible neutrality, meaning that, if you don't want to have an owner or you want to have like an open kind of like set of functions that you can essentially call without any restricted owner sets or like role-based permissions, right? Like sort of veto permissions and stuff, you can do so, right? Like these are open primitives that anyone can build, anyone can interact with. You can interoperate with it by building your own contracts and so on, right? So you now have this like world of, again, whatever you want to build with the added benefits of all the Web3 ethos that I guess we all believe here, right? Trustlessness, permissionlessness, and credible neutrality can be built into these contracts as well.
Got it. So just to clarify it in my head, so is StarkX not really like fully trustless? Is it because of how StarkX works, and therefore StarkNet is just like the evolution of that?
So both systems are custodial, meaning you would always own whatever funds or NFTs you have. I think trustlessness comes in the form of like when you're submitting transactions, right? If you're submitting transactions to a blockchain, you have essentially miners that are essentially like, both constructing the blocks and also proposing the blocks, right? In this case, StarkX environment, Immutable X is taking on that role, right? The Immutable X essentially acts as the single operator, right? What that means is that, of course, there is a risk here on Immutable X that, questions like lifetime and censorship exist. So these risks will always exist with a single sequencer configuration, right? If you want to build, for example, more complicated primitives, generally, if you want to have the sort of the closest touch point with the actual scalable settlement layer, which is StarkX, you would essentially build on Immutable X, right? Which is again in an environment that is run by a single sequencer operator, right? So there is definitely a trusted assumption over here in terms of Immutable X being live, right? Not censoring and just building these primitives essentially for the community. Now on StarkNet, right now there is a single sequencer as well, right? Because they're prioritizing scalability and just generally the developer experience. But over time, There has been a lot of discussions already in terms of like progressively decentralizing this environment, right? So over time, the sequencers that are essentially taking all of your transactions, right? Every transaction that you're sending and essentially packing it together and ordering it, will be decentralized. You'll have a lot of parties, you'll have different coordination strategies that are essentially trustless. So that's a sort of differentiation.
Got it. Okay, that makes a lot of sense. But I guess as you mentioned in the first instance, the important part here is none of this is custodial. Like everybody still owns their assets, and nobody can take that away from them, right?
Exactly.
Okay, cool. That makes sense. And this one then I'll give to Rez. Like why is Immutable supporting StarkNet? Like what are the benefits for us aside from all these additional functions that we can do in StarkNet versus StarkX? What does it actually mean for our future?
Yeah, so I think one of the real focuses is as Immutable X and Immutable in general, is we want to help our NFT projects, in particular our gaming NFT projects, be successful. And we believe by helping them be successful, that means providing them greater access to liquidity, providing them greater composability with other applications, and just providing them those base primitives they need to help their projects be successful. And what we're really excited about StarkNet is because of those reasons which Ignatius mentioned. For example, being able to write general smart contracts on StarkNet, we believe these sort of like the ability to do these sort of things on StarkNet, which we couldn't do on StarkX, is really going to help our gaming projects take it to the next level. And especially like access to liquidity. Like we believe on like a multi-rollup future, access to liquidity is going to be so much better when we have, when we're beyond just StarkX. We're accessing liquidity on StarkNet, we're accessing on StarkX, and who knows where else soon in the future. So that's why we're really excited, because we think this step into StarkNet is just going to take our projects to the next level, especially basically projects that are launched on Immutable X. So yeah, we're really excited.
Got it. Can you make it a little bit concrete for maybe the developers out there, right? Like, what are the things that they couldn't do in StarkX before using our APIs that they will be able to do or build with this move to StarkNet?
Yeah. So one of the biggest ones I'd say is composable applications. So on StarkX, applications, because StarkX is application specific, where our application is NFT trading and minting, what it means is that we can't write applications which compose with that. So now, say for example, if you've ever developed on Solidity or Ethereum, you can have your smart contracts interact with other smart contracts and do dynamic stuff. For example, you might take a flash loan from Aave and then use it in Uniswap and do all this fun magic. And that same magic you can take onto StarkNet. You can write applications that, you can write your NFT application and have that interact with an NFT staking contract. That NFT staking contract could interact with, an AMM, whatever. It opens up a whole new world of opportunities with composable applications. So that's really what the new thing is that developers are going to be able to do.
Got it. So I'm sure some of these developers here have done a bit of Solidity or something similar. Are you saying that they can just move their Solidity contracts to StarkNet once we're deployed there?
Yeah, so there exist tools right now that enable you to take your Solidity code as is and deploy it onto StarkNet. Those are currently things like the Warp Transpiler, but we highly recommend that developers actually learn Cairo, because what we're seeing is that Cairo it's a purpose-built language, and what that means is you're really able to unlock all the efficiencies of StarkNet by actually building in the language of Cairo. So yes, you can take your existing Solidity applications and deploy them on StarkNet by using a transpiler, but we highly recommend that new developers on StarkNet actually learn the Cairo language, as we think it's going to be a very useful skill to know.
Got it. But what are you actually telling, or what are you actually requesting the developers that want to build to do, right? Do they build StarkNet native applications now that StarkNet is here, or is there a different step of building with Immutable rather than going direct to StarkNet? I'm just not sure if there's a difference there. If there is, would love for you to clarify that.
Yeah, so I think right now the way we're describing it is we want people to follow immutable-based standards, which will enable them to be kind of interactable and visible in the Immutable X ecosystem. So what I'd start off by saying is visit the StarkNet channel in our Discord, where I've pasted several learning resources. So the best place to start actually for new developers who are interested in StarkNet is actually to learn about StarkNet and Cairo and in general what the language is, how to deploy applications, all that. That's knowledge that's still going to be very useful. then I'd actually say have a look at our GitHub repository, because there we're actually discussing all of the new things we're planning to build, and we're actually actively seeking community input and feedback. For example, we're looking for feedback on our L1 to L2 NFT bridge, and we've got so much valuable feedback already, but we're always on the lookout for more, as we think community input is so valuable. So that's what I'd say to anyone listening or any developers listening. Go into our channel, StarkNet channel, and visit those learning resources.
Got it. Awesome. Having said that, then, so let's say a developer, tries to learn about StarkNet, learns about Cairo, then they want to build stuff that will be compatible with Immutable X. So therefore, they need to know, okay, what is Immutable X going to do? What are the things that's going to be relevant for Immutable X? So a question for maybe Ignatius, what is the roadmap for Immutable X? What's going to happen 3, 6, 12 months from now? What are the kind of projects that people should think they should bring to Immutable X?
Yeah, so I think going to your first question, Nigel, what I would say is, so as Rez said, if you want to build on StarkNet, you can already do so. We've launched a set of what we call auxiliary-based contracts. And I think one of our principles as a team, right, one of our philosophies is that we want to make everything forward compatible, right, which means that, we want to set new standards, but at the same time, we want to have these standards fully compatible with whatever trading primitive that we build in the future, right? So if you build on Immutable X's contracts right now, you should feel confident that like eventually when we open up trading and different forms of trading, it can be compatible. Now, I would also say that like with StarkX, you can already start building on it now as well, right? So we have quite a lot of games as well, building their economy side, like the trading of NFTs and everything through StarkX. And essentially, you don't need to be worried, right? If you eventually want to, like, if you consider, okay, I've got all this economy side on StarkX, but I wanna have more complicated, let's say, DeFi mechanics, right? I want to have yield-bearing NFTs, or I want to have DeFi MMs, or something else, right? You don't have to be worried. Within our roadmap, and so okay, so this is where I'll get into our roadmap, and just put that to the side for now. I'll get back to the whole like, how do we then bring these assets, or how do we bring this sort of like layer of interoperability between StarkX and StarkNet? So in terms of our roadmap, and I'm not going to speak on exact dates at the moment, I'm generally going to speak in terms of phases, right? And so these phases, if you guys read the blog posts, we've listed down 5 phases. And essentially, the way I think of it is like phase 1, it's kind of like, okay, let's build all of the core auxiliary contracts that are necessary to facilitate trading, right? So not trading yet, just the sort of auxiliary contracts, right? So those are the things that we just released. And there will be one more that is going to come up soon over the next fortnight to a month. And that's essentially a layer 1 to a layer 2 NFT bridge, right? Which means you can essentially start bridging your NFTs from layer 1 to StarkNet. Right, now that's phase 1. Phase 2 is essentially, okay, let's build a Immutable X trading experience on StarkNet, right? So how we do trading right now on StarkX, right? We want to build a user-facing parity version of that on StarkNet, right? So limit orders, right? Limit orders and settlement contracts. Those two are the main big things that we're going to build in phase 2, right? Now phase 3, this is going to be about creating a better user experience, right? So we call this the StarkX parity in the blog post. I think of it as kind of like a vertical integration, which means if you think about this in terms of technology stacks, let's say you got the topmost stack, which is the closest touch point to the user. You have let's say the marketplace, right? And you've got the lowest stack possible, which is essentially the contracts, right? So we want to have vertical integration across every layer of our product suite, right? To create a more seamless experience for you guys to interact with our primitives, our trading experience, and really everything else on StarkNet, right? So that's phase 3, vertical integration. Now phase 4, so this is where essentially we get into horizontal integration, right? So this is where we start to build the links between StarkX and StarkNet, right? Which means if you've already built your game and you've got your economy running on StarkX, you will now be able to move those assets across trustlessly. That's really important. And we've got a few designs at the moment to kind of really explore and make sure that this is fully trustless and also, seamless for our users as well. So now you can move these assets across into StarkNet, right? And then make use of this full NFT ecosystem that exists on StarkNet, right? That's phase 4. And then phase 5, essentially, this is what Alex and Robbie kind of touch upon. This is where we get into fractal expansion. That's the term I call it. And so this is when we start to consider more, dedicated rollups that essentially settle on StarkNet, right? So there are a few sort of theoretical things that still need to be kind of figured out or practical things rather. It's like, recursive proving and sort of like cross rollup interoperability in a StarkNet future. So a few things still need to be ironed out, but that's a sort of goal for phase 5.
Awesome. I will not pretend that I know everything about this, but that sounds super exciting. Which brings me to the question actually, why should a developer care to build with Immutable X and our standards rather than just doing their own project? What's the advantage to them?
I would say, so Immutable X, kind of going back to the whole forwards compatibility point, but we try to look at what's out there, right? We have been in the space for quite some time. We know what standards work on Ethereum, and we want to essentially kind of build, like, not only like sort of be more opinionated in terms of what standards we're actually introducing for the sake of essentially a better NFT ecosystem, right? So that's from a perspective of like, if you want to, like, we want to always push for, again, the best NFT standards that you can essentially build on, right? And this could come in the form of, for example, we release royalties, right, as one auxiliary contract. And there is this preset that essentially allows you to only reduce your royalties, right? So you can't essentially increase it. And this essentially protects both buyers and sellers so they're not subject to like random increases in the price of their asset, right? So these sort of like nuances that you could say nuances in terms of like the design of these standards are really important to us, right? Because we want to set again a more safer, more robust set of primitives, right? Infrastructure to build your NFT game or NFT economy. So yeah, that's really one thing, and I would say like the other part of this is that you can also essentially access this liquidity that Immutable X is already built on StarkX, right? And so this is kind of getting to the point of like, okay, what does cross rollup liquidity mean, right? And kind of going back to the whole like fundamental definition of liquidity, it really just means like to be able to quickly trade, buy and sell your assets, right? And I guess the word I'll sort of focus on is essentially quickly, right? And easily, I guess I'll just add on to that, right? So you can think of this as like no matter whatever rollup we essentially operate on, you'll have access to that liquidity if it's a Mutable X supported rollup, of course, out of the box, right? So liquidity has been considered the bandwidth of Web3, and like it's been like this fundamental thing that a lot of different protocols have been fighting for, right? But now, if you want to build your game, you can plug into the ecosystem. You got a set of robust standards, and you can also access this global liquidity.
Makes sense. So if I understand that correctly, it's kind of like, hey, why would you build in this place when if you build using these set of standards already, it kind of opens you up to an already existing network and liquidity, right? Like rather than starting from scratch, like a bunch of projects / games will already be able to use your project or whatever you built, and you're essentially at least opening yourself up to an already existing market rather than starting everything from zero. How about you, Rez? Was there anything you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, no, I think the key value which Ignatius highlighted was that global access to liquidity. Anyone can go ahead and build their own, contracts and try and build their own, little ecosystem. But what they're going to find is their users will really find it lacking when they don't have buyers for their NFT at a fair price, or they're waiting days for their NFT to sell. And that's going to be problematic. People want to be able to have liquid markets. People are so used to the Uniswap experience of instantly buy, instantly sell, or even real world experiences where you instantly get something. People don't want to wait. And that's why we think the liquid market, the really focus on liquidity is really important here.
Awesome. Okay. And you mentioned cross rollup, right? I don't think we dug into that yet. And a rollup that we support. Does that mean that it's not going to be just StarkX? It's not just going to be StarkNet, like whatever rollup we're going to be supporting, and people will have access to that liquidity as well.
So as I mentioned at the beginning, right now our focus is more on Stark-based rollups, which means rollups that are built essentially on StarkWez, ZK Stark technology. So yes, to answer your question, Nigel, so you could build whatever application on any Immutable X supported Stark rollup, and you will have access to this global liquidity, right? Now, cross rollup the sort of cross rollup communication, this is still an ongoing research topic. We've explored a few different designs in terms of like how we essentially, perform this operation, right? So there are multiple different, paths you could take. Essentially, you could go L2 or like Ln to Ln minus 1 and then back to Ln, right? That's probably the most simplest approach with very limited sort of overhead infrastructure that we, Immutable X or anyone else would really have to build. But then we're also exploring, again, that you go straight away from Ln on one side to the same, I guess, Ln, but on like another rollup, but at the same layer, essentially, right? So this is a bit more of a challenging design problem. We've got a few designs at the moment that kind of work on that, but I think there is, an additional, rather philosophical constraint here with NFTs is the question of like uniqueness and also non-existence. So I don't want to dive too deep into that, but it's more like, when you're moving or when you're like sort of bridging these assets across, if this NFT exists on multiple different rollups, can you really call it unique, right? So it's really just fundamentally questioning the intrinsic nature of an NFT, right? Or non-existence, which is when it disappears temporarily from any rollup, right? And then kind of slowly appears on the other one at a time later.
Yeah, I would love to dig deeper in that later. Before we get to the other questions prepared, we already have a few questions from the community, so let me ask a few of them here at the bottom. First is from Wens. Question is from Immutable and Starkware recently announced the creation of a global liquidity layer for all NFTs based on it, be it L2 or L3. Can you tell us more about this innovation?
So I can jump here as well. So this is kind of what I was talking about just now, where it doesn't matter if you're an L2 or L3, you will have access to this global liquidity layer, right? So this is a layer that exists above both L2 and L3. I guess the mental model is you can have like, I think this diagram also exists in block toast, but you have like L1, L2, L3, like think of it as a stack, and then you got Immutable X is kind of like spanning across all L1, L2, L3, L4, and so on, right? So it's sort of like this liquidity layer that essentially slices through all of the other rollups.
Cool. Next question is from Vic. Will staking and all those functions exist on StarkNet or StarkX?
So staking our tokens right now, well, I guess it depends what you're staking, but if you're referring to staking our tokens, that's currently still going to be based on our StarkX solution. But in the future, we will be exploring how that could evolve on StarkNet. But currently, we are still focusing staking around our StarkX solution.
Is there an other side to that problem then? Like, if it's not staking for Immutable X tokens per se, what about the tokens that Immutable X supports, like the ERC20s that they support, and staking that for the different games? Is that going to be available in StarkNet?
So on StarkNet, because we are able to write arbitrary contracts, that could definitely be possible. People could have their own tokens and they could, of course, write their own staking contracts, which have their own incentive mechanisms around it, right? That's not something we can do on StarkX right now because, there's no incentive mechanism around we can't write an arbitrary incentive mechanism around staking, right? For us right now, our token holders are incentivized to stake because they get rewards from, the trading activity that happens on our protocol. But if we wanted to allow that arbitrary like ERC20s to stake right now, what would we even reward them with? We can't say. So on StarkNet, because people can write their own applications, we are actually looking into possibly having that as a primitive, like a staking contract, which projects can pick up and deploy on their own. But on StarkNet, yes, they would be able to write their own staking contracts.
Yeah, awesome. Sounds great. Another one from Vic. Are there any plans to increase transparency about the StarkNet implementation? For example, how do transactions of StarkX get rolled into L1? And are there any plans to open source these mechanics, etc.?
So far, we do have the immutable scan. So that's been live. That allows you to essentially see the historical list of transactions that go through StarkX. In terms of the StarkX implementation, there is the StarkX docs and also our docs. I think together they should give like a high-level overview of what our implementation looks like. And in terms of like that also includes like I think you mentioned how transactions get rolled up to layer 1. At a high level, of course, right? Like what are the things going on inside StarkX's black box, for example. I remember reading this actually really good diagram on StarkX's version 4 doc site. So if I can post a link here, I'm not sure where I can post it, but there is a link to StarkX's version 4. And then if you scroll to the very bottom of the sort of the content on the side, like the links, you should be able to see that there. The mechanics, so again, the contracts for our StarkX implementation is also public. So you would be able to see that on GitHub. I think it's called StarkX contracts. So you should be able to see like what operations we're performing. You can check with our contract, which is again public on Etherscan. So you can look at that and you can see what operations we're running. Let's say batches currently get published roughly 10 to 12 hours, and you'll see this function, for example, update state. And you can kind of cross-reference that with what you can see on the contracts, and then you can see, okay, what is actually going on here, right? These batches getting like what data is actually being updated, what are we actually verifying before actually committing to a new state update. So all of that is actually already public and open source.
Awesome. And I think that's the beauty of building in the blockchain. Everything you can actually see already. You don't need anybody's permission. Cool. In that case, going back to our prepared questions then, everybody in the audience, again, if you have any questions, just feel free to drop it in the events questions channel. But this one is for Ignatius again. For those who do want to get involved and they want to explore more, what do they need to do?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So it depends how you want to get involved as well. This is probably the first question you should ask yourselves. I think if you've already got, for example, a game, a game that you're working on the side, for example, and you essentially want to build your, gaming economy around it, and all you need is very simple primitives, start to build on StarkX, right? Don't worry. If eventually you need to build more complicated primitives, you can always trustlessly move your assets across to StarkNet, right? That's a sort of, one scenario. If you want to, for example, just get your hands dirty and you want to get deep into the whole Cairo and StarkNet stuff, take a look at our repo, the one that Rez mentioned, so IMX-StarkNet, and just have a look over our contracts. There is a lot of documentation to support it. Look at the docs folder, and we've also got articles to explain the high-level motivation around it. I would say, start with that. Just get familiar with, these base building blocks. And then if you want to add your own functionality on top, feel free to. If you want to, for example, improve on some of these standards, feel free to. There is a contribution.md doc as well on our repo. So if you ever want to post an issue, or you want to post a discussion topic, or you want to just post something on Discord, we encourage you to do so, because we want to work together with the community. We want to make sure that these standards are the best possible versions that it can be, right? And so yeah, that's really another option. And yeah, I'll probably just stick to those two for now. The latter being building on StarkNet, and the former building on StarkX.
Yeah, awesome. Is there anything? Are we going to have any hackathons or contests or grants? Is there anything like that people can look forward to, or are these still being thought of and brainstormed?
Yeah, so that's been raised a few times. I'm personally really hyped for these things, and we are considering essentially running hackathons and also grants. So yeah, I think that's most of what I could say right now, but yes, it's definitely on the table and we will explore this soon.
Cool. And in the meantime, Rez, how will the team intend on interacting with the people who's interested? If they have any questions in the future, what can they do? Who can they talk to?
Yeah, so simple answer here. We're pretty active in the StarkNet channel in our Discord, in the Immutable X Discord. So if you send something there, we're checking it every day. We have our allocated time. So please ask us questions. We're very happy to help. So that's how we're interacting. We'll also be asking questions to the community because we want to understand how we can best help you. So please take the effort to be responsive, figure out what your project needs, if you have a project, what your requirements are, because really, we just want to help support you guys. So yeah, head into our channel, the StarkNet channel in our Discord.
Yeah, if you haven't seen that yet, it's just go to StarkNet. I'm putting it in the events questions channel as well. Drop in there. Rez is always there as well.
I also wanted to mention that so Rez has also been posting some issues as well on our GitHub. So these are just discussion starters. And yeah, so feel free to take a look at those, have a read of them, and also feel free to comment or propose your own design.
Issue. So the GitHub is the GitHub repository, right? Is that correct?
That's right. Yep.
Ignatius?
And you go to the issues tab, and you'll see it there.
Yep, the GitHub link is in the StarkNet Discord channel as well, so you can access it from there.
Aside from that, what does the team want to know from the community then, Rez?
Yeah, so we just want to know what your project needs. For example, we've seen many popular projects on L1 have things like staking in their NFT projects, or they might have, fractionalization, or they might have whatever. So we really want to know, what does your project want? What is your community asking for? So even on our GitHub right now, we have an issue around NFT staking. Is that something your project wants? Is that something you have thought about or a design? Come and let us know. So definitely, I think that's what we really want from you guys. We want to know what makes your project successful, what is your community asking for, and how we can help build those things for you.
Awesome. Could you give them a sample? What do you mean by NFT staking?
Yeah, so say, for example, one thing that I'll take the example of Moonbirds from L1. They basically have this ability to nest their NFTs, and while their NFTs are nested, they gain rewards. So on StarkX, that's not something we can really offer right now because it's application specific. But on StarkNet, we're really able to explore these sort of ideas and say, hey, what if you had your NFT and you wanted to stake it and get rewards while it's staked? That's a smart contract that we could help you guys write. And we want to know more about how you might actually use that, or whether that's actually useful to you. So that's a very simple example.
Well, I'm looking at the issues tab right now. It looks like the NFT bridge between L1 and StarkNet is quite popular, with already like 7 comments in the week already. Could you give an example of what the discussions there have been like? What are the things that you like seeing from the community as well?
Yeah, so some of the discussions there. So we basically laid out a bunch of what the workflow would look like from going from L1 to L2. We also discussed what sort of assumptions there might be, and really we want the community to question whether those assumptions are things they're willing to accept. For example, one thing we have is we require users to, authenticate themselves on behalf of their project to actually register with the bridge. Is that something your project's okay with? Is it not okay with? Let us know in the issue. Also, if you think that you have a better design than what we've come up with, for example, our current design uses L1 to L2 message passing for every single deposit. But people have come up with innovative designs around, batching messages between L1 and L2 and using that to save gas costs. So if you think that, there's room for innovation as well, and you've looked into the space a bit as well, feel free to comment in that regards as well.
Awesome. Glad to see how the community is just jumping in and contributing already and sharing their thoughts. That's pretty much it. If people have any other questions, feel free to raise your hand or drop them in the events text channel or events questions channel. If not, then Ignatius, Rez, do you have any closing thoughts, key takeaways that you want people here to think about as for this kickoff? And what are other events that they should be looking forward to?
I think the only thing I would probably say is, this is a really exciting time for both, if you're a layer 2 enthusiast, if you're a blockchain enthusiast, if you're an NFT enthusiast, if you're a Web3 gaming enthusiast, this is really the start of this cross rollup future where you can access this, again, liquidity that you don't have to worry about, and you can focus on building your own unique experience of gameplay. So I think personally it's really exciting, and would encourage just everyone to just jump in. You don't have to be an expert in cryptography or ZK Starks or any of the ZK stuff. As long as you have a desire to learn, I'm sure anyone can pick up this given a good amount of time as well. So yeah, just encourage that. And yeah, I think that's pretty much it. So I think we'll be available on the Discord channel. So yeah, feel free to reach out to us there.
Yeah, I think on my side, I just leave you with a last thing as well, like everyone here. I just really want you guys to see how excited we are, because it's amazing the sort of stuff that you can do on StarkNet that you couldn't do on Ethereum L1, especially when it comes to things like gamified NFTs or gamifying your applications on chain. For example, people are working on on-chain chess, for example, and that's fully capable. That's something that you could easily, well, not easily, but to write, but that's something that StarkNet can handle, because we have cheap computation, and hence you can write really complex smart contracts. There's also people exploring things like physics engines on chain in smart contracts. Imagine trying to do that on L1 in Solidity, on Ethereum main chain. That would be ridiculous in terms of gas costs. But because of L2, all that is so much cheaper. So we're exploring really a whole new dimension of smart contracts and applications, and we're going to see so much innovation come out of the space. So if you've ever been holding off from like building your application or deploying an NFT project because you just don't have any ideas, I want you to see like there is a whole new realm of opportunities available. So please jump in.
Speaking of that, there's some questions regarding what are the possibilities in the future. This one is from Gaspard G and J. Will there be a way to mint on-chain NFTs in the future?
So I think it depends what you mean by on-chain, because technically NFTs are on-chain. But if you're referring to the metadata of on-chain, like of NFTs, then there are already existing ways to kind of have on-chain metadata. For example, using base64 encoding. That's something that you can do on Ethereum L1. Of course, it does have trade-offs. For example, it takes more storage space to write, encoded, large encoded strings on L1. So that storage cost, that would be possible on StarkNet. You could have, base64 encoded stuff on StarkNet as well. Of course, there is a trade-off there because it's, it might be larger and have a gas cost or a fee associated with it. So yeah, it is possible on, I guess, the same way it would be possible on Ethereum.
Awesome. Also from Gaspard, his question is, if I deploy ERC721 StarkNet contract and mint NFTs, will I be able to see those on the market / Immutascan already?
So not yet. You wouldn't be able to see it just yet. But that sort of seamless vertical integration is something we are working towards. But yeah, soon.
Soon. Yeah, exactly. Soon. Like many things in the blockchain world, soon you will see this. I have a question. Is this the last time the audience will see you in this events channel / an AMA? Should they expect another event soon or in the near future?
No, it's not the last time. We do plan to do these like fortnightly roundups. So essentially those roundups are a place where we would showcase projects, obviously presented by the people who build it, to essentially just talk through their projects and like kind of just really, I don't know, if you want to advocate for it, you want to show how it works, you can do so. So we'll be doing these things fortnightly. Not only projects, we'll also use it as a way to initiate, research topics, discussions as well. So the one that's actually coming up is going to be focused on bridging. So Rez and another one of our team members, Calvin, will be kind of leading that roundup for the coming one.
Awesome. So if somebody wants to be involved in this roundup, what do they need to do?
Yeah, I would say just tag us on the StarkNet channel on Discord. Just tell us you want to showcase your project. Obviously, I think a name for your project, a description, or maybe a link would be really helpful. And yeah, we'll kind of put you into the schedule and we'll see how we can fit you in for the next roundup.
Cool. So they just bring their project, right? Is it like kind of like a demo day or something like that?
Yeah, you can think of it like that. Like if you have a presentation or a demo, feel free to present it.
Awesome. Okay, so if any of you are already low-key doing Cairo contracts and already have something to prepare, feel free to tag the team, and we'd be happy to present / add you into the roundup. And that's it. Thank you for coming.
Thanks, everyone.
Awesome. Thanks, Nigel. Thanks, everyone.